there'll be so many families sat around breakfast tables, dining room tables, and there's so much on their mind. I think in 2026, there's an awful lot going on for families. Life is genuinely lifing. And then an email comes in from the school that leads to a conversation. And the school have said, we've noticed a difference in your child. We think maybe there are some discrepancies in the way that they're learning. Perhaps there are some, what quote unquote, behavioural concerns. And of course, that's just the surface. And what they're suggesting is that you find out what sits beneath. That's where it all starts. Jane, I'd love to chat today about how that moment in a family's house leads to discovery. And I really think it's that. It's discovery.
Yeah,
So, Jane, tell me, I guess, about what happens next. Where does a family go to and what do they get from that discovery?
Well, to start with, I think actually a lot of families would probably be quite happy to receive that email because there's every chance that they've noticed themselves at home as well. A lot of families out there are living in crisis, as you said, everything in 2026 anyway.
Yeah.
And if their child are having difficulties and challenges on top of that, then they've probably noticed themselves. So they may be happy that that's been picked up.
Yeah.
Because actually we get a lot of families that pick it up themselves, but feel frustrated that school don't see anything. And that's a whole new conversation around masking.
Yeah.
But from that moment onwards, I think it's that journey of discovery, as you said.
Mm-hmm.
And then the family have got to decide what they want to do. And it is sad because actually what we normally would expect to do is go to our GP, have a conversation and get put onto an NHS waiting list for whatever it is that you're looking to be assessed. Sadly, we know that on the NHS for ADHD and autism assessments, it's such a long wait. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't still go down that route. But until you find out how long the wait is, you can't decide if that's right for you or for your child to sit on that wait. The other alternative is to go private, of course, and then you can get access a lot quicker to an assessment, to that discovery of actually, are there other things going on, and to help you understand your child and any difficulties they might be having, and basically how their brain works. And I always think that knowledge is power.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the thing about coming for an assessment. Knowledge is power. And when you know what you're dealing with, then that's much easier. It doesn't fix everything. And these people don't need fixing. It's easier for everyone to understand. And then I always think it's about changing the environment for that child.
Yeah. So well, if I can boil that down to a few A words then, because actually there's an awareness piece where it all kicks off. Like suddenly either you become aware or the school have become aware that something's going on and therefore we need some discovery. And then actually during that discovery, there's a whole journey, and it could be a journey with lots of stops and it could be some back and forth. Eventually you get to a place of acceptance, like an acceptance of this is what it is, and there is a difference of some description, and that's okay, and we're learning about it, and the knowledge being power. And then the last piece that you've suggested, there's an adjustment that maybe has to be made, and some adjustments that have to be made at home, some at school, and we can only do that once we've become aware, accepted the answer, through either an assessment process or just an awareness gathering process. And of course, those things are options. We can gather a lot of awareness from curiosity and discovery. I want to go back to that awareness bit again, because we're talking today with the title, I guess, of our conversation being around more than just a label, right? And sometimes it feels that people want to suggest your child should have a label. Sometimes maybe you feel your child needs a label, just like if you looked in your cupboard for whatever it is you're looking for, you'd need the label to know what it was. Like maybe the label is something that you need. And I don't think that we should vilify labels, because they serve a really, really important purpose. And yet they can feel a bit boxed, can't they? So tell me about that piece. We sat around the table again. We're talking about either the email that's come in or the behavior that we've noticed. And we're thinking, I don't want a label, or I need a label. Tell me about the label feeling.
Label feeling.
Yeah.
I had the label feeling when I got my children and my adopted children assessed. So I get the label feeling, and people feel differently about labels. Some people want a label. Some people worry about a label. Some people worry about a label for their child's future. If they want to go into a certain career, is that going to stop them? So there's a lot of complexities around a label. I think the important thing is the motivation behind a label. Like you say, and there's a lot of talk about let's not label our children. And it's not really about labeling and then moving on, is it?
Yeah.
It's labeling to understand. And I think once you understand, then you can give the right support, the right environment and the right adjustments, as you've talked about, for that child and for the family as a whole. So I think there's a big piece. And if you're looking at a child having an assessment, the whole family goes through the journey of awareness and acceptance. Like you say, it's not that child alone. The whole family has to go through that understanding. And we meet a lot of parents that through NHS CAMS, for example, have been offered and put through a parenting course. A lot of people feel that's a label of you're saying I'm not a good enough parent.
Right.
And I kind of wish we could have a different label for a parenting course because people
teach you how to be a parent like you're not doing it right or you haven't got the skill set.
Exactly. And it's for so many people, it comes across as a criticism of their parenting. And I'd love to be able to change and shift that because it's absolutely not. And when you understand ADHD and autism, for example, you understand as a parent, you have to adapt your parenting to make life easier for you and for your child. The same as we're talking about in a school environment, we need to look at more modifications and adaptations. So it's not about people parenting wrong. It's about people understanding how to modify
how to parent differently.
Parenting. And that's actually, once you get to that understanding, that can be really quite a magical time.
Yeah, and it's the adjustment piece again, and the difference. And I tell you one thing I always struggle with, and actually, and you must find this as well, actually. But the term neurodiversity, for a lot of people, that term sounds like the thing itself, right? Whereas actually, if you think about the very notion, the word it's neuro, brain, diversity, difference, like that's a whole population thing. Like every human being has a neurodiverse profile. It's theirs. It's like their DNA.
Yeah.
The divergence comes in when it verges or moves further from the typical, the middle of that spectrum and that profile. And that's a big distinction to make, because if you go back to neurodiversity and an everyone thing, then if everyone's different, then there is no one size fits all. I remember when my eldest was born, and one of the midwives, when we were going for sort of, the checkups for antenatal and all of that, she was really old fashioned, and she was sick and tired of having parents coming in saying, oh, no, I wouldn't do it like that. In the book it says. And she said, don't read a book, read your baby.
That's great.
And I love that. And the same applies here, because we're all different. Our children are all different, which means we've got to adapt and adjust our parenting for our children and stop looking at everyone else's, right?
Yeah, 100%. And, we always say, if you've met one child with ADHD, you've met one child with ADHD. So again, talking about the textbooks and talking about, say, parenting classes or education awareness, there's a vast amount of resources and advice that can be out there, but it really is about understanding that individual.
Yeah.
100%.
So let's go back to that table again. I love that table.
Love that table.
I've got an image of this family around that table right now. I don't know what they're eating. Lasagna. They're eating lasagna. There we go.
And chips.
Oh, that's controversial.
Yeah, I know.
Lasagna and chips.
Yeah. And a bit of salad.
Carbolicious.
Yeah.
With a green on the side.
Yeah.
That's an image.
Yeah.
So we're around that table. We're having lasagna and chips and salad. We've got that awareness. We've decided that we're going to take the awareness to the next phase of discovery. We're going to have an assessment. And if we've chosen go down the route of the NHS, then we know that there might be a way. If we've chosen to go privately, we can get things moving a bit quicker. That's really just a timing thing. We've chosen to have it. Tell me about the assessment. Like, what can the family, what can people expect from that assessment for, I suppose, this is a multi-layered question, for all parties, because of course the child will experience the assessment in the way that they experience it. The parents will go along that journey. Like, what's that like?
I think partly, to answer that question, it depends on where they have the assessment, because again, not one size fits all in terms of different providers, NHS, private. Everyone is it's different, although we all adhere to the same NICE guidelines in how to do an assessment.
And
if
I love
you
that
like.
term, NICE guidelines, isn't it?
I know.
It's a wonderful acronym, although some would say it's a backronym, apparently. That's when it's an actual word as well. But there you go. Fun fact for you.
Oh, I didn't know that. Anyway, so they follow those guidelines. But here at Makewell, for example, how that would look is you'd receive your appointment. At Makewell, we like to do face-to-face assessments. Not everywhere does, and not everywhere, and that's very personal. It depends. Some people might prefer to have an online assessment, but we prefer face-to-face because we believe a lot of our families prefer face-to-face. You can really get a feel for the whole family and the child when you're in the room with them. And there's no rush. We take plenty of time. Before the assessment, we send the family paperwork. Now, this in itself can be tricky because obviously if we've got a potential ADHD or autistic child, we may also be having an undiagnosed ADHD or autistic parent.
Yeah.
And we're going to send them forms to fill in, which obviously they've got new tasks to initiate. That can be tricky.
Yeah.
But there's questionnaires, not that long, but there's questionnaires for both parents, there's questionnaires for teachers. So in essence, we gather evidence before we even see the child, so that clinician already has a sort of a fairly good picture. Then we invite the child and the family, both mum and dad or both parents or single parent, whatever, into the clinic here. We do something called a QB test. It is called a test, but I prefer to call it an activity because it's not a pass or a fail, but it's just 15 minutes in front of a computer looking at how your brain is functioning and your attention and your focus and things like that. And then, in essence, you're having a 2 to 3 hour conversation with a clinician where if you're here with your child, they have got plenty of space, they can run around, they don't have to sit at the table for 2 to 3 hours, which again, telling somebody, an ADHD person might fill them with fear. I've got to sit at a table for 3 hours. No, you haven't got to sit at a table. And you can have plenty of breaks, go and see our horses, etc. What the clinician is doing is working through that child's early years and looking for evidence of their struggles and their challenges to see if they meet criteria for a diagnosis. That's what they're doing. The other reason why we don't rush here is because parents have got years and years of worries, information, examples in their head, often written down.
Yeah.
They want to get that out. They want to make sure they've told us everything. So we give them time to do that and to have that conversation. Sometimes, if it's clear cut, they may leave that day with an outcome. But more often than not, we take it to what we call our multidisciplinary team, where we have all the different professional backgrounds and we discuss the case and then we agree an outcome. And then they get phoned with the outcome within usually about a week.
And it's a telephone call.
It's a telephone call.
So that it can be a conversation if needed that way.
Yes.
Nice.
Yes, absolutely. Always a conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we're there at the outcome. And you just described the kind of journey to that outcome as being very, very supportive, caring and supportive and comforting and at the pace that's comfortable for the family. And that's important. And, we're meeting here today at the centre and I've looked around and I said to you when I arrived, this is such a lovely space and you've got the horses and open air. So that is a comforting environment that shouldn't feel like a test.
Correct.
And you've said that a couple of times that it shouldn't be a test. It's an activity. It is an assessment. It's an activity-based assessment, and there's no right or wrong answer. There's no pass or fail. Of course, no amount of times of saying it's not a test, it's not a test, it's not a test would stop people maybe feeling like it's a test, and there is an outcome that either the school want you to have, or that parents maybe want an outcome because it would make it all make sense. And that's the thing, isn't it? It's like, make it make sense. And if the outcome was, I was going to use the word positive there, but you know what I mean? If there was a positive result, as in yes, tick box ticked, letters after your name from now on in, right? Then that becomes the outcome that validates, and maybe that people are searching for that. Let's imagine that there isn't an outcome that passes, you call it the clinical threshold, which sounds very clinical, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it is.
Yeah.
It's a clinical threshold. It's set out by guidelines. And of course, if you don't meet the criteria, you don't meet the criteria. That doesn't mean that your experience was not your experience. it doesn't mean that the difference that you have as a child or in your family is not the difference you have as a child or in your family. So what happens next?
Yeah, absolutely. And that can be quite overwhelming because, like you say, a lot of people come and almost expect to get the diagnosis of what they're coming to be assessed for. And in fact, sometimes we get people ring up and say, how much is it for a diagnosis? You don't pay for a diagnosis, you pay for an assessment.
Yeah, that's interesting language, isn't it?
Isn't it? So there's no guarantee that you're going to pay this money if you're coming privately and you're going to get a diagnosis. But what there is a guarantee of is that you will have, or your child will have, a thorough assessment. And there obviously are challenges and difficulties they're experiencing to bring you to this point.
Yeah.
So there will still be answers for you. There will still be justifications, and there will be signposting. So you will still get a feedback call. You will still get feedback and explanations as to why we believe your child is having the difficulties that they are having. Because, for example, with ADHD, there are other things like trauma, like autism, like anxiety that can mimic ADHD signs and symptoms. So we will still give you answers and we will give you the next step, and we will still continue to support you on that journey. And I think that's really important to understand, that your child has still had a thorough assessment, and we will hopefully still move them on to a better place and to the right pathway and the right support.
Yeah. And you're right, better place often comes from that knowledge and that awareness, and the assessment gives you an outcome, even if it's not the clinical threshold outcome that you thought you were paying for. Like, give me the diagnosis, because that will make life make sense, and it will make it easier to be able to go back to maybe the school and say, yep, that's it, there's the certificate, blah, blah, blah. But of course, if there isn't that outcome, and even though, as you rightly said, there's lots of positives that come out of not having passed the clinical threshold because you've got the awareness, some people will move to a feeling-based response. Like, maybe, you must have experienced this. Some people will be, I imagine, angry at you, at the assessor. Like, they'll be like, what I said he had, or I said she was this. And like, anger's often just a displaced feeling of something else.
Yeah.
Tell me about those emotions. In your experience, what sort of emotions could families expect to grapple with, like have to face?
We do have those. Of course we do, because not everybody that comes to Makewell will get a diagnosis. On average, it tends to be about 85% of people do get the diagnosis that they've come in to be assessed for. And probably it's that high because to pay privately, they've done a lot of research.
Sure.
So they kind of know what they're talking about often. In terms of emotions, yes, we've experienced that emotions. And when I say we get a phone, we'll call you with an outcome. That can often lead to more discussions, more meetings. I always think about it sometimes with some families as being a little bit like the grieving process.
Yeah.
And like you say, because actually they've what we see when a family arrive here is years and years of struggles and difficulties leading up to this point. And all of that they've been carrying inside them, and they're hoping that this is, like you say, the final relief and understanding and validation, and it's not what they thought it was. So absolutely they can feel angry, but most do get to the acceptance stage. They just need support often for us to take them through that journey, and actually to still see some hope and some positives and what to do next. It's always that what next.
Yeah. Well,
we will answer the what next still for them. They will still have that.
So to go to your point there about grief, because of course anyone that's familiar with the theory of grief, the journey of grief, and you can look at some of those theories, and I can think of one in particular, the grief curve, Kubler-Ross grief curve, and it's really neatly mapped, of course, to change in totality and not just the loss of a person or whatever. It's grief is the grief of loss of something, whatever that something was. So change initiates that process. Acceptance is then followed by experimentation, adaptation, adjustments, and then integration of new world. You of course don't stop at that point, right? You support people in experimenting and integrating and adjusting to the new world. Tell me a bit about what comes next. And for some people, and obviously for some, you wish them well, and your part to play in that journey finishes there, and for many it doesn't. So tell us what happens next.
So at that stage, sometimes we need to take longer with the parents to explain and give them time to reflect and pause and go through that phase, and then meet up with them again or have another discussion with them, because sometimes they need to actually understand why their child hasn't met the threshold, because they will probably be completely assure themselves. So we have to go through that. Then it's like you say, the what next. And that's what we don't ever want a family to come and just feel, whatever the outcome, that they're not supported all the way through and beyond. We've never wanted to be a diagnose and discharge service here. So the what next can be, so for example, I said earlier, things like ADHD, other things can mimic some of the signs and symptoms. So let's say, for example, trauma. So if through the assessment the clinician felt that actually their issues were more trauma related than ADHD, they didn't meet the criteria, then we have a private CAM service. So yes, we could signpost to an NHS service. People have got choice, and that's what we're all about, is families have got choice. Nobody has to stay with us, but we will always offer a choice, and we will always offer a pathway for them. So it might be that actually we suggest their child comes for some therapeutic intervention for that. So again, it's still looking at what their challenges are and what we can support the family with, and helping them to understand as well. So, that they've got to be able to parent in a way that is therapeutic to the child's needs. And every child is different, as we've already discussed. So it is that ongoing support. Like you say, sometimes it's referring to an external organisation, but we will be there to do that and help them.
And I love that point, though, because, of course, it's packed with choice. And actually your responsibility in that choice process is to provide all the options and to support the family in choosing the right thing for them and for the child, whatever that right thing is. And I think that's a really important distinction. Some families might come to you thinking that what the outcome that they want is, and they might be thinking, well, you as an organisation, and you're in this wonderful world where as a business you do wonderful things for people, human beings, and of course it is still a business. And some people might cynically think, well, surely you just want us to, right? And that not to be true, and you also know that it's quite normal for people to maybe wonder that. So to support someone in making the right choice for them feels, not just the right thing to do, but quite comforting that there are those options, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, our whole clinic is made of a multidisciplinary team of clinicians, and their focus is on the patient. And I know, hand on heart, that absolutely no one would ever advise something just to get money in for the business, as you say, but understand why people might think that. Absolutely. But I think anybody that experiences time with us at Makewell and a journey with us will understand that that's absolutely not the case. And like you say, we will give people that choice, and whether it's picking up the phone and referring them to the NHS, because we have those good relationships with the NHS, and if we can do that, we'll do that. So it's a choice.
Let me go back to the label bit again then, because more than a label is exactly what we're talking about here. Some people who've been asked, or it's been suggested that they should look into this, whether or not label or traits towards a label or threshold, some people are going to be thinking, I don't believe in this nonsense. Right? Everyone's got a label these days. Isn't that just an everyone thing? Hasn't everyone got ADHD? You must hear that a lot, right? So what do we say to those families who are, going along with the process because it's been suggested and signposted, and would certainly not want to, dispute that, and yet in the back of their mind they're thinking, it's everyone. What would you say to them?
I think we quite often see that, actually. So sometimes if we're talking about a child and we have, say, both parents, sometimes one parent's more on board than the other parent, and they go along with the journey because the stronger one in the belief is driving it forward. So we do often see that, actually. And I think it depends on people's exposure. So if you've gone through your life as a parent and you don't really know anyone that's neurodivergent, you don't work with anyone that's neurodivergent, you don't really understand it, you've perhaps even got quite an old-fashioned view of maybe the naughty, loud schoolboy running around the playground being hyperactive, and you don't understand. So a lot of it comes from lack of knowledge. And I think once people start talking about it more, it can take people different paces and different amount of time to come to terms with it. And I think one of the things that we always reflect back on is, if you're bringing a child in for an assessment, is how's the child? Are you seeing your child struggle with some areas of their life? And actually, wouldn't you want us to try and work out what the struggles are, why they're having them, and actually give them better choices so that they can get over those struggles and thrive in their childhood and through into adulthood.
Because agree or disagree with the system, the clinical thresholds, the way that it all works, agree or disagree with that, you'd be struggle to find a parent that would disagree with the idea of giving their child the best version of life that they should have, right? And
Absolutely.
it comes back to that knowledge bit again. Of course, knowledge is power, and the adults around the child will be gaining all of this new knowledge throughout the process. A child doesn't know what they don't know. A child may not know that their difference, their world, is any different to another child. A child may be acutely aware that they have a different experience. All of that becomes a spectrum. If you could talk to, it's interesting now, if you could talk to children now about what this process, if we call it that, is going to gift them as their adult selves, looking back on the way that they then experience the rest of their school journey and starting into their careers and all of that, what would you say to them? Because they don't know what they don't know, and they might struggle to understand if we put it in a way that adults would put it. So how would you explain what they're going to get out of all of this?
I think we always talk to children, because actually we get this question a lot in terms of, say, a parent who's about to bring their child in saying, how do I explain it to my child? So actually we do get asked quite a lot. And we don't, and again, it's not about a test. And that's what we try and encourage parents to just say, relate to your child. So if your child's having difficulty with emotional regulation, social situations, sleep, whatever their difficulties are, relate to that and say, we're taking you somewhere where the experts can talk to you, spend some time with you and work out why you're struggling with your emotions, why you're struggling to not to make friends, and how that is difficult for you, and what we can do to make it better. So if we can understand you better, then we can help you to understand yourself better. But we always put a positive spin on it as well, because, and that's why around Make Well, for example, we have frames of celebrities who are neurodivergent and just put a little bit about them, because people focus on the negatives. And of course, there are lots of challenges, yes, but we forget to talk about the strengths.
Yeah.
And that's why we kind of want to show families when they come around here and they see different celebrities that are neurodivergent, that they perhaps didn't know that. But actually, I'm not saying that ADHD or autism is a superpower, but what we want to do is highlight the creativity. So, for example, it might be saying to a child, how you're so good with art and you're so creative, that's really special. We want to understand what makes you so good at that and what else we can do to make that better, or why you're so caring, or why you've got such a great sense of humor. These are all the positives that neurodivergent people can have. So it's trying to make that child feel as a whole, not kind of as we're criticising them. So not we want to look into why you're doing this and this and this, as if there's anything wrong with them. So I think a lot of it is around terminology.
So, and thank you for the segue there with terminology, because again, you said something really important there about sort of, we're not saying that ADHD or ASD is a superpower in and of itself. And that would be, that almost gives some people the ick a little bit. It's sort of like,
exactly.
let's not say that this is, the wonder of the world and doesn't have any challenges, and it's actually everything else that's causing it to be. No, there are genuine challenges. And like with every human being, we all have superpowers of some description, whether we're on, a neurodivergent condition or spectrum or whatever. Like we've all got our own unique superpowers. Some of us struggle to unlock those superpowers, given the systems and the spaces and the environments around us, unless we have support. And that's where I think the clinical thresholds and the assessments and the ongoing integration. The other thing, the terminology bit. So many of us and many parents that have got their children starting this journey with them will be coming up in a time where it wasn't SEN or SEND, it was special needs. Emphasis on the special in a negative way.
Yeah.
So have we got to reclaim the word special for its positive meaning?
I would love to see that, because so much of what we've talked about, certainly in the last couple of minutes, also can often have a stigma around it. And it's really interesting, because I don't know, sometimes even things like parents might feel more negative towards maybe autism than ADHD,
right?
For example. So we've had some families where we've assessed them for ADHD and the clinician can clearly see it's actually not ADHD, it's much more like autism. So then suggests to the parent they might want what we call a top-up. We don't charge them another full assessment, but a top-up to go through the the recommended autism assessments.
Yeah.
And that throws some families. It's odd, isn't it? Because they're almost more okay with one than the other as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's interesting. And again, it's stigma, it's terminology,
Yeah.
it's experience. You said about, again, and like we can think of this when we were kids and what people used to say about special educational needs in our day, and how, you know, the ADHD was, you know, ADHD with a capital H. It was always about the hyperactive kids.
Yeah.
You know, too many E numbers. People used to say, he's had too many E numbers this day. He's been drinking fizzy drinks. No, actually, there's just an awful lot of energy that needs expending because of and so we think about ADHD as that. Behavioural, like naughty child. No, just Wrigley needs a sensory break, needs some time out, needs this and that. ASD, of course, was just autism on its own, and we've latterly learnt that there's a spectrum and lots of different variants and lots of different traits. And the versions of autism that we probably saw when we were younger were the more extreme versions of autism, and therefore you can understand why a parent might be like, I don't want to think for a minute that my child might have autism, because in my mind, autism is that and not traits along that spectrum that may or may not be superpowers if I understand them.
Yeah.
And may or may not be challenges that I need to adjust. So there is so much. We could do a whole conversation purely on terminology, couldn't we?
Absolutely, we could. Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm slightly obsessed, and people that know me know I'm obsessed with language, and not about what a word means, but what you tell yourself it means, and therefore how that acts as a precursor to behaviour. The child's journey has been the topic of our conversation today, and we've talked about the child's journey through the lens of the parents around them and the family around that dining room table with lasagna, with chips and salad. Very important to get the salad there. And I guess to just sort of wrap things up, if you could just describe that journey with Makewell, because that's your experience of how the journey plays out. It's with the children and the families that you get to work with. But just describe that journey in a couple of sentences to just leave us with that, what comes next after the dining room table feeling.
If I could give you a vision that's in my head to answer that question,
Yeah.
It is a parent sitting with their feet up, which I love to see next door when they're waiting for their child having part of an assessment, sipping a cup of tea. They've gone from the dining room table, the complexities, the confusion, the unanswered questions. And when they join Makewell, I literally have a vision of I want them to feel like we're holding them as a family, and they can just sit and relax, unwind. When they get here, unmask. If the child's running around, hyperactive or not, however they are, everything's okay. So the minute they get here, we hold them, we take care of them, and they can literally take a breath.